Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about Edmund Wilson's famous essay, Marxism and Literature. Marxism and Literature, first published in 1931, then in 1938. Edmund Wilson, 1895-1972. First published in The Triple Thinkers, 1938, and initially appeared in The Axel's Castle, 1931, in a different form. It is considered one of the earliest and most nuanced essays to bring a Marx theory into American literary criticism. Edmund Wilson was a major figure in a 20th century American letters. He was a close associate of major literary and political figures like F. Scott Fitzgerald, Vladimir Nabokov, etc. He was interested in merging literature with a broader philosophical and a social discourse. Wilson was never a dogmatic Marxist, but was deeply engaged with historical materialist perspectives and wanted to develop a flexible critical model. Inspiration and a historical context of the essay. The Russian Revolution 1917 had a profound impact on global intellectuals, including Edmund Wilson. Wilson was inspired by the Soviet Union's attempt to integrate culture with ideology. The Great Depression raised questions about capitalism, inequality, and the role of the intellectual. Edmund Wilson was also reacting against the new criticism and formalist schools that divorced literature from its social context. Now let's analyze the main objectives of the essay. The essay aimed to assess how Marxist theory could be productively used in literary criticism. It also aims to warn against the mechanical applications of Marxism that neglect aesthetic dimensions. The essay also aims to reconcile the economic base of literature with the spiritual and creative powers of the artist. The essay aims to defend the autonomy of art while still emphasizing its rootedness in material conditions. Now let's analyze the key themes in the essay. Literature as a social product. Literature arises from specific economic and class-based conditions. Writers reflect the contradictions, tensions, and ideologies of their times. The next theme is historical materialism. Literature should be studied with regard to the economic base and historical conditions of the time in which it was produced. Edmund Wilson uses examples from French realism, like Balzac, to demonstrate how authors embody their era's tensions. Now the next theme, critique of economic reductionism. Edmund Wilson critiques Marxist critics who reduce literature to mere class struggle allegory. He warns against ignoring literary form, imagination, and style. The next theme, writer as a historical agent. Authors often reveal truths about a society beyond their personal political beliefs. Even conservative authors can write progressive or socially significant literature. Now the next theme, dialectic of aesthetics and ideology. True criticism must consider both aesthetic value and a social function. There is a dialectical relationship between an artist's individuality and the socio-political environment. Now let's go to the structure and section-wise summary. Although the essay is not formally divided into chapters, It can be understood in 5 clear conceptual sections. First section, Introduction to Marxism and its literary relevance. This section explains basic Marxist ideals, that is, economic base versus ideological superstructure. It stresses that culture, including literature, reflects the material base of our society. The section 2, that is, misapplications of Marxist criticism. And this section critiques simplistic Soviet and Western Marxist critics who use Marxism dogmatically. Criticism is often reduced to labeling authors by class, position, or ideology. For example, denouncing authors merely because they don't openly promote a revolution. The section 3, that is, great writers and social mirrors. And this section discusses authors like a Balzac, a royalist, who nevertheless truthfully depicted capitalist society, and a Tolstoy, a Christian moralist, but a master at exposing the contradictions of his class. The value of a literary work lies in its authentic representation of social reality. Now the fourth section, that is, aesthetic power and ideological insight. And this section argues for preserving literary quality in criticism. A work must be both ideologically insightful and artistically powerful to be great. A critic must be historian and artist, not merely an ideologue. Now section 5, synthesis and conclusion. And this section calls for a more comprehensive Marxist literary criticism that includes historical context, aesthetic value, and a psychological complexity. Marxist criticism should not be a political orthodoxy, but a methodological lens. Now let's have a look at the key arguments. All art is ideological, but ideology should not be mistaken for propaganda. The greatest writers transcended the politics by capturing universal truth through specific material and social context. Literature is not autonomous, but it is also not reducible to social function alone. The intellectual must serve as a mediator between ideological structures and aesthetic sensibility. Now let's talk about the relevance and legacy of Edmund Wilson's essay. Academic influence. The book laid the groundwork for later Western Marxist critics like Raymond Williams, Frederick Jameson, Terry Eagleton, etc. And the contemporary relevance of the essay. Wilson's model is relevant in post-colonial theory, cultural studies, intersectional critiques of literature like class, gender, race, etc. The essay offers a balanced humanist alternative to doctrinaire readings. It encourages students and critics to interpret literature within a historical framework while respecting its imaginative richness. It is an excellent pedagogical model for understanding the intersection of art and ideology. Now let's have a look at the main quotations. First one. A man may be an excellent Marxist, but if he lacks imagination and taste, he will be unable to make the choice between a good and an inferior book, both of which are ideologically unacceptable. Edmund Wilson underscores that ideological alignment alone doesn't equip a critic to discern literary merit. He emphasizes the necessity of aesthetic sensibility and imaginative insight in literary evaluation. This highlights his belief that effective criticism requires more than just political correctness. It demands genuine literary appreciation. Now the next quote. It is usually true in works of the highest order that the purport is not a simple message, but a complex vision of things which itself is not explicit but implicit. Wilson argues that great literature often conveys multifaceted perspectives rather than straightforward messages. He cautions against reductive readings that seek overt ideological statements, as they may miss the nuanced realities embedded in the text. This reinforces his advocacy for a more sophisticated and a layered approach to literary analysis. Now the next quote. The leftist critic with no literary competence is always trying to measure works of literature by tests which have no validity in that field. Here, Edmund Wilson critiques who impose rigid ideological frameworks onto literature without appreciating its artistic dimensions. He warns that such approaches can lead to misinterpretation and undervaluation of literary works. This statement reflects his call for critics to balance ideological considerations with literary expertise. Now the next quote. The rules observed in any given school of art become apparent not before but after the actual work of art have been produced. Edmund Wilson here emphasizes that artistic norms and standards emerge originally from creative practice rather than being predefined. He cautions against prescriptive approaches that attempt to dictate artistic creation based on ideological criteria. This perspective champions the autonomy of artistic expression and the importance of post-creation analysis. Now the next quote. The truth is that there is short-range and a long-range literature. Edmund Wilson differentiates between literature aimed at immediate political impact and works that explore enduring human experiences. He suggests that conflating these categories can lead to confusion and a misinterpretation. This distinction underscores his belief in recognizing the varied purposes and scopes of literary works. Now the next quote. What Marxism can do, however, is throw a great deal of light on the origins and social significance of works of art. Wilson acknowledges the value of Marxist analysis in uncovering the socio-economical contexts that shape literature. He sees Marxism as a tool for understanding the historical and societal influences on artistic production. This perspective integrates Marxist insights with a broader appreciation of literary complexity. Now the next quote. But the man who tries to apply Marxist principles without a real understanding of literature is liable to go horribly wrong. Wilson warns that applying Marxist theory without a deep literary understanding can lead to flawed interpretations. He stresses the necessity of combining ideological analysis with a literary sensitivity. This reinforces his advocacy for a well-rounded approach to literary criticism. Now going to the next quote. Marxism by itself can tell us nothing whatever about the goodness or badness of a work of art. Wilson asserts that Marxist theory alone is insufficient for evaluating artistic quality. He emphasizes that aesthetic judgment requires criteria beyond ideological alignment. This statement highlights his belief in the distinctiveness of artistic value. Now the next quote. Marxism is the opium of the intellectuals. In this provocative inversion of Marx's own dictum, Wilson critiques the dogmatic adherence to Marxist ideology among intellectuals. He suggests that Marxism can serve as a comforting but a blinding belief system. This reflects his skepticism towards uncritical ideological conformity. Now the next quote. The study of literature and its relation to society is as old as Herder and even weaker. Edmund Wilson places Marxist literary criticism within a long tradition of examining the interplay between literature and society. He acknowledges predecessors who explored a cultural and a historical context in literary analysis. This situates Marxist criticism as part of a broader intellectual lineage. Now the next quote. Coleridge had flashes of insight into the connection between literature and society. Edmund Wilson recognizes that even dramatic critics like Samuel Taylor Coleridge perceived links between literary forms and societal structures. He cites Coleridge's observations on linguistic patterns reflecting social organization. This underscores the enduring relevance of analyzing literature through a societal lens. Now the next quote. But if Marx and Engels, Lenin and Trotsky are worth listening to on a subject of books, it is not merely because they created Marxism, but also because they were capable of literary appreciation. Edmund Wilson emphasizes that the founding figures of Marxism possessed their genuine literary sensibilities. He suggests that their critical insights stemmed from both ideological frameworks and an appreciation of literary art. This highlights the importance of combining political theory with literary understanding. Now the next quote. Engels, in a letter to Margaret Harkness, already referred to above, in warning her that the more the novelist allows his political ideas to remain hidden, the better it is for the work of art. Edmund Wilson references Engels' advice that political messaging in literature should be subtle to preserve artistic integrity. He uses this to argue against overtly didactic literature. This supports his view that effective political literature often conveys its messages implicitly. Now the next quote. Balzac, with his reactionary opinions, is worth 1,000 of Zola with all his democratic ones. Edmund Wilson highlights that Balzac's conservative views did not hinder his profound social insights in literature. He contrasts this with Émile Zola's more overtly dramatic stance, suggesting that literary value transcends political alignment. This reinforces his belief in asserting literature on its artistic merit. Now the next quote. The more the novelist allows his political ideas to remain hidden, the better it is for the work of art. Reiterating Engels' sentiment, Wilson advocates for subtlety in integrating political themes into literature. He argues that overt political messaging can compromise artistic quality. This underscores his preference for literature that weaves ideological content seamlessly into its narrative fabric.